Hey, great day, and welcome back to the podcast. And so, this is an epic celebration. We are in season 2 of this podcast. And so I'm super excited to introduce season 2. We are going to be talking about how can you be more highly qualified to get the life, the business, and the career that you desire. And so what you will notice is that some episodes may have some homework activities. Some of them will feel like we're being Wi-Fi BFFs. And I'm going to really talk to you about how you can show up as the best version of yourself. You may also hear me talk about the words lesson and podcast episode interchangeably, primarily because I see this season 2 more as a podcast course that will walk you through a journey. But I'm really excited for season 2. I hope that you are as well. So let's go ahead and get into today's podcast episode. Hey, my name is Dr. TK, and on this podcast show, we will uncover abundant tools to help you become the CEO of your business and your life. I am a mom and wife who merged my knowledge as a clinical psychologist and professor for over 20 years into building a multi-six-figure mental health business and 7-figure digital product business, serving others and doing what I love. Now, I believe that you can make a wildly abundant living unapologetically while also dreaming big, enjoying life, and making a huge impact in your community. This is the Therapists Deserve Abundance podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Highly Qualified podcast. This is your host, Dr. TK. So in this particular lesson, we will be talking about how to take full advantage of being a token. Okay. And so just to give you an overview about what we're going to be talking about today, this will be more of I'm going to say listening and processing episode. And then I would highly recommend that if you need to listen to it again, reflect, take notes of certain things that may come up, because what I will be doing is helping you reframe from being seen as a token. We will define what a token is, but we're going to learn how to stand out. I'm going to walk you through some examples throughout my journey in the professional and school realm in terms of grad school and some things that have been experienced. But I want you to take note of what experience come up for you that may be similar or just like a memory that pops, up in your mind, and just take note of it and write it down and go back to it later. Now, in terms of the frame token, most people see it as you being singled out because of a characteristic or trait, or let's just say ethnicity or race or sexual preferences or orientation, whatever it may be. I just want to let you know that we are going beyond race because I serve a very diverse crowd. So even though I will be giving you my own personal examples, some of them of how I have been treated as a token, or I may have assumed that I was being treated as a token and what I did with that. We are talking all things related to what do you do when you are dealing with being stereotyped, especially in a professional setting. And you may even experience some microaggressions, okay? So on a deeper note, of course, in terms of what you're going to do after the podcast episode, this lesson is you're going to learn how to reframe how you see yourself as maybe the outcast, and we're going to learn how to flip it, reframe it into something very, very powerful. So let's go ahead and get into it. And so up to, I'm going to say, grad school, I was very, very oblivious, naive to stereotyping and that it exists, primarily because where I grew up and where I lived at pretty much until I left and went to grad school, you only know to the degree of what you've been exposed to. And when I went to even undergrad, I didn't leave home. I just got in my car and drove to school. I didn't stay on the dorm. And the people that I was hanging around, even if, they were just in class with me or we were hanging out in between classes, they either looked like me or we grew up in similar environments and they just weren't Black. Okay. So when I entered into the grad school realm, that's when I got my first and multiple after doses of what does stereotyping look like in the professional setting, school and work? What can oppression look like? What can racism look like? discrimination look like. And the only time that I was, I'm going to say, slightly exposed to these terms was undergrad. My first 2 years, I had chosen to take a African American history class. And the professor that we had was very much so teaching us about reparations. I know what reparations are now, but he was going hella strong back then. And I was just like, I don't get it. Like, we were reading the history, but I probably would have appreciated the information more if I would have maybe even had more semesters with taking the information even that in that class like slower, right? So that was pretty much my exposure to some of these terms that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to take you all the way back to, I believe it was 2004. I entered into my master's degree in 2003. I did a 2-year program where it was a master's in clinical psychology, but I cannot do anything in terms of therapy with a master's degree. Didn't know if I wanted to get the doctorate degree, but we had the option to take additional courses because we were there an additional year anyway, because some of our classes were like every fall or every spring. So even though our master's program was only 30 units, 30 credits, 30 units. Technically, even though it was a year, it was extended into 2 years. So me and a couple of my friends that I met in grad school, we said, you know what, we might as well take the courses that are going to qualify us to sit for getting a number for MFT intern at the time, even though now it's called an associate. So in grad school, I had my first experience of feeling like I was the token, but that word didn't come to mind. It was just more of a phrase like, I don't fit in, I'm not qualified to be here, even though my class performance, my grades, the conversations I was having in class, my assessment reports with testing and all those things, I definitely was in the right place. But when I looked around me, that was also my first exposure to being in a predominantly non-Black or brown classroom, in which people didn't look like me. At least in undergrad, it was like Black, brown, Caucasian, Indian, Asian, diverse, mixed. It was just a lot of people. But when it came down to grad school, it was just like me and one other gentleman, one Filipino young woman, one Pacific Islander, and then everybody else, because we had to talk about it in cultural diversity, everybody else was primarily Caucasian, right? We may have had one Latina like in our class. And so it definitely felt uncomfortable. And I tried to press through it, but I couldn't help but to think I didn't get a good GRE score. So why did they choose me? I know that I'm well-rounded, like they tell you to be when you enter into undergrad, but I mean, it's grad school. And so I just started feeling like even though my, again, grades and all the things aligned with me having a space there, I didn't feel like I belonged. I could not really have this conversation with anyone else, especially people at my school, because I just feel like people wouldn't understand me. And at the time, even though I was in school for clinical psychology, they had just started talking to us about finding a therapist and just, maneuvering through our own stuff. So I just figured out my own way of, now I know, positive psychology, positive thinking, affirmations, journaling, vision boarding, like that was already in me, but I didn't have any names for it. I was just doing things that would make me feel better. But at the end of the day, it left me feeling out of place and weird. Then the second semester of my second year, because we were staying to get those MFT hours, basically the way my program was set up is that we had to get 500 hours under the clinical psychology degree, but that was easy because I worked at a group home full time and we were able to count all of my work hours for my clinical hours. So clearly that was easy and I was working overtime. But for the MFT, we had to actually conduct therapy under supervision. So talked to a couple of my classmates and they had told us about a practicum site not too far from the school that I would be able to pick up some clients and participate in group supervision. There was really not any individual supervision unless it was maybe a more severe client, to a degree. But pretty much I really did not have any type of individualized, personalized supervision. And as a clinical supervisor, after getting licensed, I see the value in at least touching base with students. So it just, irritates me when I look back at a lot of supervisors are doing the bare minimum. And I even saw it even after I got licensed in certain workplaces. And so to speed things up, there was a time where I received a client and I was practicing all the things that I had learned in class, with the client. She was severely depressed. To give you an idea in terms of a scale of 1 to 10, she was at a 9. She was sometimes suicidal, not to the point where she would have to be hospitalized, but we did have to call 911 on one occasion. My thing with, helping somebody face depression back then was beyond the theoretical orientation, beyond the air quotes basic strategies. I just thought, let me try to get her out of her funk by just figuring out, what does a person need, not what does a diagnosis need. Because some people are only serving the diagnoses and not treating the actual human. So she was in a predicament where her children were taken away because of some setbacks that she had experienced personally, also because of her mental health. So because I had worked a lot with kids, I had asked her what soothes her, and she really didn't know how to answer that question. We did not have Santre therapy, so I looked around the office and I had some kids that I was seeing on the weekend. And so I said, do you like to color by any chance? And she was like, actually, yeah. And it reminds me of being with my kids. So that was one technique that I did with her. And that was kind of like when you put your hands in Santre therapy, it is calming. I also asked her, how does she feel? Because of confidentiality, even though no one knew who I was in that neighborhood, right? But they can see us walking out the clinic door. Is she okay with getting outside in the daylight? Because one of my concerns was like, if you're so depressed and you're always indoors with all of your windows and shades closed, that's not healthy. That's not allowing you to get sunshine. We're in Southern California. So she was more amazed that I was willing to do what we now call, and I actually found somebody who has a whole podcast episode on this, walk and talk therapy. This person takes their clients, with permission of their clients, of course, out around in the city when there's good weather, and they find that the client is just more upbeat than being depressed in a room, So basically her depression within a few months working with me went from 9 to 3. Now, something to keep in mind too is that she saw 2 other therapists, including the supervisor, before I saw her, and they were trying to figure out how I had such significant breakthroughs. But what I'm wanting to highlight here is when you are highly qualified and you show up with your gift, even if you don't know that you're showing up with your gift, things around you will start to fall in place. Okay. So one day we're at clinical supervision on a Friday evening, and one of the interns is talking about a case, and it was about an African-American client. And I didn't really talk in group supervision, again, because I didn't feel like I had anything to contribute, because honestly, my first 2 years of grad school, which is why I also chose to go get my doctorate, I knew that I was doing well with clients, but I did not have the memory capacity, or maybe I did not apply myself that much, because it did feel like it came easy to me. When they would talk about certain theories, I would know what the theory was, but when I was doing therapy, I wasn't thinking about no theory, you know what I'm saying? Like we do now. And so I just felt like I didn't know enough because when they were talking in theoretical terms. And I'm like, can we just talk about this person feeling sad and blue? Like basic terminology, right? Which we know these days works when you're promoting yourself online and talking on video. You want to say language that clients are using, not psychobabble. However, that was my first exposure. So bottom line is they're going around the room and I ain't saying nothing. I don't really talk in group supervision. I may ask a question, but I don't say anything. And so they had come to a stand halt, and they end up talking about the progress that my one client has made, and that even the supervisor and a seasoned other intern was not able to break through with that client. So they asked me, how did you do it? And I just told them what I was doing, but ultimately in so many words, I was treating her like a person, So what they end up doing is they were stuck with trying to figure out what was really going on with this client from maybe a cultural perspective. So because I was so quiet, they said, hey, Takesha, like, what are your thoughts? And I didn't have any additional thoughts. Everything that everyone else said, I agreed with. Like, yeah, you may want to look more into that, And so it's almost like they waited, at least this is how I felt. They waited to see if I was going to give them some more. And I guess into the Black experience. Like, that's how I felt, because they were like, you sure you don't have no insight? Like, I know that you both, like, they said something around like we may share cultural similarities, but they said it in a better way. It didn't feel offensive, but I was just like, it was one of those moments where it was like, and this is what I said, but I had to breathe. Not everyone who's Black has the same life experience. And to be honest, I've never been, like, let's just say if this person's been to court, I've never been to court for the law, outside of a traffic ticket. I have not experienced what they're experiencing. So I don't know. And I can't try to think about what they're experiencing because it's not my client. I'm not watching a video of them talk, so I can't read body language. I didn't go into all these details, but I'm just sharing with you what was going through my mind, because that was my first experience of like, oh, this is what it feels like to be a token, right? And so moving forward, some other things that happened. I'm actually going to save some of these things for a later podcast episode. But throughout my doctorate degree, I definitely experienced dead in my face from people like the dean, just like outlandish ignorance statements that people don't even realize is pulling them out of the cultural competency realm, meaning they lack cultural competency, even with students. But over time, I learned quickly how to make my tokenness, because I didn't like the way I was feeling. And if you don't like something, you have the power to change it. So I learned how to take my quote unquote tokenness, that's what I call it, and I made it work for me and not against me. So I want you to say that with me. If you can think about a time where you have felt less than, you have felt like you don't belong, how can you use maybe even how you're internalizing a situation, because no one has outright said anything. It's just your limiting mindset, negative thoughts, right? How can you make the situation work for you and not against you? So I'm going to give you some brief examples. In certain work settings, before licensure and after licensure as a psychologist, at some point I stopped telling people I was from Compton because they would say, oh, do you know so-and-so, rappers? And then they would say things like, oh, are you, like young people be like, oh, are you from a gang? And those are stereotypes. But I learned how, especially when I was working with teenagers, and sometimes, especially when I wasn't in Los Angeles, I was in Northern California, all people would see was that I had a doctorate degree or that I was getting my doctorate degree. So even kids from neighborhoods similar to mine, they would assume that I think that I'm better than them, maybe because of the way that I carry myself, the way that I talk. I talk professional, but I'm still down to earth. So sometimes, of course, as long as it's in the best interest of the client, I would share like, no, I know what your hood is like. You know what I'm saying? It may not be exactly the same. And they would say, how do you know? You don't know. You probably live in the hills somewhere. And I would be like, And when the door opened, I would say, actually, I'm from Compton. People wide open talking, couldn't shut up, right? Because that made me relatable. Okay. When I was working in the jail, I was the only psychologist in the whole unit. The rule was, because it does cost the county more to employ a psychologist, they wanted one psychologist per dormitory in the facility that I was in, but everyone else was a master's level clinician, LCSWs, and MFTs. And so how I stood out is I volunteered my services because I really enjoyed testing, but working for the agency I was working for, we're not allowed to test kids in jail. That has to come from an outside agency. But because I know how to do testing really well, that was my gift. I was a TA all throughout grad school. And then I actually taught assessment to, psychology grad students. I decided to say, you know what? If any kid has an IEP, if any kid has a past psychological evaluation, I would love to review the report, and we can use our weekly clinical supervision where all the therapists are in there, where I can break down the results. And then I can even have a meeting with the individual therapist and if needed, the supervisor, but they trusted my interpretation of the results. And I would help those therapists go and effectively communicate to the child's caregiver, their parent, probation, and the teacher so that they can advocate for the kid. So again, I am allowing me feeling different, feeling out of place, to work for me and not against me. Working with adolescents or transitional age youth in my private practice, I would go straight from the jail into working in my private practice. So I would have on jeans, tennis shoes, a nice shirt, sometimes a hoodie. It just really depended on where I had to go in LA County. If I'm going into the projects and we playing basketball, I'm not about to be dressed. And I don't want to stand out looking like no extra professional, because then people gonna act a little funny, around the kid that I'm serving. And so we were told to dress down even when we had a master's or a doctorate degree working in the jail setting. So it made me very relatable to the adolescents I was working with the young people I was working with. And just to give you an example of what it can look like on a higher professional level, when I had a group practice, my entire staff was all women and they were very diverse. Okay. I'm talking African American, African, El Salvadorian, bilingual, Caucasian, and then other Latinas, right? And Asian. So, when we were looking to get raises from insurance panels, what I would advocate on a sheet of paper is that we receive all of these referrals because we have a very diverse group. I still to this day am not the person that says I only want to work with a certain group of people in terms of color. Now, social psychology speaks up for itself. Everybody gravitates to where you feel comfortable. I don't really look at color when I need help in my business. I look at who can help me solve my problem. But there are certain instances where I feel good around being around people like me, but like me could be the skin, the color of my skin. It can be my religion. It can be me being a mom. It could be me being a blended mom. It could be me being a wife. It's different hats that we wear throughout the day in which we will go to environments that make us feel more like ourselves. Okay. But at this point in time, I'm walking in my purpose, and I know that you're either going to or you're already starting to walk in your purpose. I am in a season where I am going against the grain. What do I mean by that? Let me speak some life into you for a second, because sometimes when we're taught how to show up a particular way, how to behave a particular way, no matter what your degree is in, non-degree, certification, you don't even have to be a therapist to access, this program. But I do want to share that once you found your passion and your purpose, show up and show all the way out. So how do I go against the grain? Well, for one, if a large portion of my business is serving mental health providers, healers, and helping them grow and open up their private practice and other streams of income, a lot of people are wanting to give away templates, self-paced courses. Let me just help you focus on 6-figure years in private pay. And all that is great. But for me, I'm really good at systems. I'm really good at coaching and teaching. Those are two different things. I'm good at responding and answering questions, especially when you're live. I really thrive off when people are giving me feedback in the moment. My goal is to give life to other people, meaning I want you to go find yours. Our life as a healer, for example, or whatever your title is not just based on, like, your life isn't predicated based on just your license. So for example, I now walk around telling my community, back in the day, I would structure my business first and then my life would be around that. Now I structure my life, my kids' schedule. If it changes, my coaching schedule is changing. My family is first. In this order, I am a woman of God. I am a wife. I am a mother. And then I am a psychologist. And then I am a business coach, in that order. You definitely want to think about that. How do you introduce yourself to someone else? In what order does all of your titles go? Your main titles, right? So I'm walking in purpose right now, where I know my gift is speaking life into other people, helping you see how highly qualified you truly are. I'm a quality assurance person. I actually like paperwork. I like organization. So why not make it a business? But I'm focused on people getting their life back, leveraging their time, because that's the definition of wealth to me, to be able to gain abundance, which means that it's a large quantity of whatever you want, however much you want, and wealth beyond a theoretical orientation. So my goal for you in this particular lesson is I want you to sit down and reflect on your life timeline of any event that made you feel less than. What did you do with those feelings? Are they still there? They don't dissipate, in thin air. Okay. It's the volcano waiting to erupt. But my question for you is, can you flip any of those events into the following statement? How can I make this situation work for me and not against me? I want you to start moving forward and showing up as your best and highly qualified version of you, because only you are qualified to be you. So with that said, mic drop, I'm done. Let me know your takeaways. Hop over into the DM and let me know how this lesson worked for you. I will link up these questions in the show notes, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Fire me up. You just finished another epic episode of the Therapists Deserve Abundance podcast. Now, I know what you're thinking. That flew by way too fast. So if you want more, please head down to the show notes for additional abundant resources. And if you're looking for a new tribe of abundant therapists just like yourself to connect with me on Instagram at Dr. TK Psych. Until the next episode, live abundantly.